Good evening, everyone. My name is Sam, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank you all for joining us for our next event, Daniel Abbott and Rajal Jones, here to discuss their collective memoir, Wounds. We'll be hosting more virtual events in the near future, and you can learn more about them on our website by signing up for our email newsletter, as well as following us on social media at Book Soup. You can even follow us on our Crowdcast page here. I'm just going to mute them really quick. And we also have a YouTube channel where we put these up afterwards, so you can catch all of our past events that way too. Our next event is scheduled this Thursday at 6 p.m. with screenwriter and author Bruce Wagner with Sam Wasson to discuss Bruce's latest novel, The Marvel Universe Origin Stories. Tonight's event will end with a Q&A, or you can ask questions throughout. You don't have to wait. And we have, sorry, I was reading something else. So to ask a question, you click the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen, and it will open a little block right there, and you can submit your questions that way. And if you see a question on the list that you'd like for our speakers to answer, you can vote it up in the queue. And please support Book Soup and our authors tonight by purchasing a copy of tonight's featured book, which you can do at the green button right below the viewer screen. It'll take you in a new window to our website, and it won't interrupt the presentation, so you can get that at any time. And with all that said, let me introduce our guests for this evening. Rajal Jones is a diversity and inclusion professional, speaker, and the director of equity and inclusion at Tennessee State University. In 2016, he released his first book, See What You Hear, a piece about actualizing vision. Jones has a BA in English Language and Literature from Grand Valley State University and an MBA from Northwood University. He has professional certifications in cultural intelligence, HR, strengths, civil rights, and affirmative action. He and his family reside in the greater Nashville, Tennessee area. Our other guest this evening, Daniel Abbott, is the author of the novel The Concrete and the co-author of tonight's book, Collaborative Memoir, Wounds. His writing has appeared in LitHub, the Nokshua Review, the Gnosko Literary Journal, and the Owen Wister Review. He has a BA in writing from Grand Valley State University and an MFA in fiction from the Vermont College of Fine Arts. Daniel lives with his family in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And this is where everyone in the store would clap. Thank you both so much for being with us tonight. We're so excited to have you and excited for this conversation. So everyone, please sit back and relax and enjoy the presentation.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We are so happy to be given this platform by Book Soup, a phenomenal store. If you are in the California area, LA, Hollywood, make sure that you check them out. So we're excited tonight just to talk to you all a little bit about our book, Wounds, and about the inspiration for it, as well as some pieces. We'll read a couple excerpts, and we will go from there. We'll have some discussion. But one of the themes that I wanted to start out talking about in the book Wounds is the concept of being beautifully different. And we thought that we'd start tonight. I'm going to just read a couple of my excerpts and talk a little bit about that subject matter, and then turn it over to Daniel, who's going to read, and we'll go from there, and we'll just flow with it and see what happens tonight. But we're so glad that you came to be with us. So I'm going to be reading from the first chapter of the book entitled I'm Definitely Different. And that section is the beginning. I begin to tell a story of my first memory of experiencing difference. I was in lower elementary school, one of those early years, and I went to visit a friend. We lived in a small northwestern Michigan town that was predominantly white. I was one of two African Americans in my kindergarten class. We had some ups and downs with those numbers throughout the matriculation, but then I also graduated as one of two African Americans in my graduating class. So definitely was in a cultural immersion experience, and in the process learned that I was different. from a very early age, began to recognize that I was different. Did not always have the concept, the cognitive understanding that it was racial difference, and not all of it was. Some of it was personality difference, family styles, um, just a host of a variety of things of difference. The way that I talked, the way that I named meals. When I went to visit this friend who was a white friend in these early elementary days, I'll never forget, they said that it was supper time, and I had no idea what supper was. I didn't know the term. My family had always called it dinner. Now, was that cultural? Was that ethnic? I don't know. But it was a difference. And that's one of the challenges as we begin to navigate racial differences, is being able to discern what is actually race, what is family style, what is geographic difference. So there's a lot of different pieces. There's a lot of diversity in diversity. But one of the things that I try to convey throughout this book is that difference is beautiful, and that we are beautifully different, and it should be okay, whether we have the same belief system or not, whether we have the same religion or not, the same race, the same background, the same style. These differences, instead of beginning to be a point of contention, can be an area of complementary partnership where we can grow and we can have a broader perspective. So I wanted to read just a small excerpt from that first chapter, describing me and my friend, another white kid, a white guy that I was hanging out with. It says, "We were beautifully different, and that was okay. This is the lesson I long for so many people to realize. For every person who feels like they're saying something fantastic to me when they state that they're colorblind, don't be colorblind. What is the joy in choosing to miss out on all of the beauty that comes with the richness of color and hue and diversity that God created to purposely exist in this earth? The notion that some feel it is a good thing to be colorblind is in error. What's wrong with difference?" I understand the intent of the statement, but here's what you're missing if you buy into this concept of colorblindness. The sentiment that you should see no color suggests that there is something wrong with my color, with my difference. My color is beautiful. Your color is beautiful. Why can't we be different and beautiful? Why do I have to be just like you to be considered good? Our world is not colorless. It is colorful, and we're better for it. You are perfectly pigmented. It is not your color that defines who you are. Your color just animates you, like the choosing of which color to use when kids pull from the Crayola 64 pack. Our color was simply the selection God made to bring his picture to life. Animation. What defines you is your character. You are the character. What do you do? How do you interact with creation? What decisions do you make? What comes out of your mouth? What is your role? Character. If there is a part of any of us that needs adjusting, that needs development, it is not the color, not the animation, it is the character. Develop your character. Commonalities, we have plenty. Differences, we have plenty of those too. There are ways that any two of us are the same. There are ways that any two of us are different. This is the beauty of connection. We all have the potential for synergies in our areas of sameness. We all have the potential for complementary partnerships in our areas of difference. We need both. Let me be different. Let me be great. For those of you who think that there is some rectitude in us all being identical, robotic beings, I definitely disagree. It is not our differences that separate us. It is the denial of the beauty and rightness of those differences that separates us. And so we wrote that with the hope that we would begin to recognize that Daniel said a few weeks ago at an event, and I've made it my mantra, different is better. Different is better. If we're all the same, then we're missing out. But if we can be different, that's better. And so I had this cultural immersion experience growing up as the only one. Uh, in my particular instance, what it meant to be the only one was the only Black person in most classes, in many settings. And that cultural immersion experience, it led to some wounds, hence the title of the book. But those wounds led to a skill set and an ability that I believe many people don't have. And that's the ability to navigate difference, cultural navigation. And so it is that navigation that we believe is important for each one of us to begin to develop the ability to do. But the only way that you can gain that skill is by surrounding yourself and immersing yourself in difference, by intentionally putting yourself in situations, or unintentionally, but most of we have to intentionally choose to put ourselves in situations where we are the only whatever it is. And so that's one of our challenges. The other short section that I'll read, and then I'll pass it on to Daniel, is actually at the end of the book, last chapter of the book, which is called The Anonymous Poster. And a little bit of context for that. And really the inspiration for Daniel and I to write the book was a reaction to the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, the race-based murders and executions that happened from concerned citizens and from officers of the law. And so in the process of researching for the book, one of the things I was doing, I looked up the date of birth and the date of death of Ahmaud Arbery. And when I did that, I found a funeral home page that was responsible for his services and for his memorial page, which existed on their website. And in the process, I found that people had gone on that memorial page, which was intended for Mr. Arbery's family and friends to grieve, to have precious memories that could help them to get through the challenges of that situation. But what I found is that people had begun to put racist comments, terrible, demeaning statements on this site that was intended to bring peace, resolve to the mourning of this person's family and friends. And so I want to read just a few paragraphs of this segment. As I read the comments, I quickly realized it was time for me to begin that everyday work necessary for a Black person, to keep going to work, to the store, to the school, to continue functioning in a white world. I knew that I had to do the work of not doing what many white people have done to me. I had to calm myself, separate myself, and combat the thoughts that lured me to the simple yet ignorant reaction of judging all white people based on the heinous actions of some, hating all white people, blaming all white people, excluding all white people. Once again, I could not allow the actions of some to defile my view of all. How I wish everyone would do that work. Stop seeing me as the stereotypical image you've come across in the media. or the one individual who wronged you. Just because one committed a wrong does not mean that all are guilty. It is this lumping, this grouping, this stereotyping that simple minds use as a shortcut instead of building meaningful relationships. Rather than pressing past the tendency to assume the next will be just like the last, simple-minded people limit their exposure to new experiences because of the negativity entangled in the previous experience. If you do that, you are the one missing out. If I do that, I am the one missing out. Missing out on the richness of connection to people with different experiences, knowledge, personalities, and practices. Shoving myself into a box of broken mirrors where my life is consumed with experiencing people who look, act, feel, and live in a sadly generic way just like me. The broken mirror produces cuts, gashes, fragmented reflections of oneself, wounds. So in that part of the challenge, I do a lot of work in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. As was mentioned in the intro, I work at Tennessee State University, which is a historically Black college and university, HBCU. But most of my career has been spent in PWIs, a term I didn't know until I got to an HBCU. PWI, predominantly white institution. And so I've spent most of my professional career helping the majority, which in most settings has been white people, to open up, to put their unconscious bias away, to make decisions, whether it be in hiring, in selection, in scholarships, to make selections based on character, to make selections based on merit, to make selections based on skill set, rather than this idea that we use in hiring of fit. Because what happens when we begin to deal with fit is what that really means is code language for someone who I'll get along with, someone who I have a lot in common with, someone who looks just like me, somebody who will be comfortable with the way that I think, someone who will be comfortable with the way that I choose music. And so we end up picking people and selecting people for our teams who look just like us. And therein, we missed out on the broadness, the richness of diversity. And therein, we have a limited perspective. Much of that comes from this lumping that I talked about in this chapter, where we group everyone and say, well, all people of this background act like this. And we stereotype, and we have all of these myths. We refuse to do the work of recognizing that there's a lot of diversity within diversity. And so we don't build meaningful relationships. We just make assumptions based on the easy shortcuts. And so my challenge is when you have the opportunity, and I should mention, working at an HBCU at where Black people, for the first time in my professional career, I'm the majority. Working in a setting like that, we also have unconscious bias and conscious bias. We also have many of those same tendencies. And for the first time, along with it, I'm in a scenario where we also have power. And so the work is the same. The work is the same. The work is helping people to challenge human nature, challenging people to do the hard work of inclusive excellence rather than take shortcuts where we just hire people who are just like us and go into the box of mirrors. And so I want to challenge you to do the work of seeking the truth of a situation, the truth of a person, getting to know the truth. And the truth lies beyond our bias, beyond our time constraints, beyond our competing demands. That's what I wanted to share with you all tonight. I'll pass it over to Daniel.
Thanks, Raj. And thank you so much for having me, Sam, and the Book Soup family. When my first novel came out in 2018, Book Soup was actually the last stop in my tour and one of my favorite stops. It's beautiful in West Hollywood. And I was telling my wife, Vanessa, how much fun it would have been to bring our families to California for a week and spend some time in the Hollywood area. And then we have San Diego in a couple days. And the snow is coming down today in Michigan. And it would have been nice to be in California today. But thank you all for coming and listening to our stories. And I'm just going to dive right in. Forfeiting White Privilege, Newaygo, Michigan, circa 2007. I was divorced with 4 kids and buried in child support. My oldest daughter, Kiera, must have been 9 at the time. My sons, Kevin and Simeon, 7 and 6. My youngest daughter, Van, would have been 5. They were with me every other weekend. I rented a small studio apartment in the Heritage Hill area in Grand Rapids, Michigan. But because there wasn't enough space, we'd pack into an old red Mercury Cougar and make the 45-minute drive up M37 to a town called Newaygo and spend our time together at my parents' house where there was much more room. We'd made that trip hundreds of times to that racially homogenous town. Me and my 4 biracial children, all squeezed into that beat-up Cougar. During those child support days, I always rode dirty. I'd buy car insurance to get a plate, and then I'd stop paying my monthly bill. My birthday would come and go, and my plate would expire. But I'd continue driving, continue picking up my kids, and making that trip to Newaygo. On one of those Fridays, we entered Newaygo and hooked a right past Speedway. I don't remember what first got the cops' attention that day. When I was a young dad, I had energy. We had fun. I might have been blasting Lupe Fiasco's The Cool album and singing Go Baby with the windows down. That's feasible, innocent. For certain, we were innocent, smiling. All of us, me, my 4 biracial children, my 2 biracial sons, and my 2 biracial moons, innocent, guilty of nothing but being brown in Newaygo County. The cop was standing outside of his patrol car talking to his friend, an off-duty cop who lived on that street. He and the on-duty cop glanced our way. He was far too away to see my license plate was expired. There was no way he could have seen if a taillight was out. I didn't have a taillight out. From my rearview mirror, I watched him rush to his patrol car, heard his sirens chirp, saw his lights go on. I thought about my expired plate, my canceled insurance, thought about how I couldn't afford to pay either ticket. Then I thought about the look on that cop's face when he saw my children, the way he rushed to his cruiser. When I think of that day, I'm reminded of the summer of 1991 when we moved to Newaygo. My parents had brought me to a gathering with some of their friends in Croton on the edge of Newaygo and White Cloud. That's where I met Lala. He was shooting alone on a dirt basketball court with a janky rim and a half-chewed net. He was a few years older than me, the only black face at the white gathering. Only he wasn't really at the gathering. He was there to ball. I had been dragged to the gathering. The only thing I wanted to do was ball. We connected that day and exchanged numbers. In the weeks that followed, he occasionally picked me up in his blue Ford Escort and rescued me from my parents' driveway, where I spent most of that summer and most of my time in Newaygo shooting alone or doing drills with my brother Brian, who is 6 years younger than me. Lala was the first person in Newaygo County, besides my kid brother Brian, to treat me like a friend. He had CGD, a disease that prevented his body from producing enough white blood cells to kill off bacteria. The disease deteriorated part of his spine. He'd had multiple surgeries by the time I met him, and he had to wear a back brace. He died young, just a few years after that summer, from complications during a vicious bout with pneumonia. I remember one of those times Lala picked me up. I'm not sure where we were going, perhaps to hoop, perhaps to just drive around. I don't remember who was with him that particular day, but we got pulled over just past the bridge leaving Newaygo, making a left toward Fremont. I was the only white kid in the car. We were all boys, one white boy and 3 black boys. The black boys lay face down on the concrete that day, their hands cuffed behind their backs. The lone white boy sat on the edge of the road watching, uncuffed, conflicted, 14, wishing he was cuffed face down on the concrete with his friends, relieved he wasn't cuffed face down on the concrete with his friends. There were 2 cops, both white, both male. No reason was given for why we were pulled over. No reason was given for why my friends were cuffed and I wasn't. They didn't care about Lala's spine, but he showed no pain. Though I know it must have hurt him. He wouldn't give those cops the satisfaction. Cars slowed down as they passed. White drivers with white passengers. White parents and their white children watching. Not seeing, I imagine, 3 innocent black boys being harassed by racist police officers, but seeing 3 black criminals being brought to justice. Young minds being shaped into wrong thinking. Generational ignorance being reinforced through misconstrued observation. What I remember most about Lala was his infectious smile. When we were allowed to go, when we climbed back into his car, he wasn't smiling. He was stoic. A kid reminded that he was black in Newaygo County, reminded he was black in America. No one spoke. Maybe the radio was on. Maybe a tape was in the deck. I don't remember. What I do remember is silence. I remember feeling guilty of my skin. I remember feeling powerless. I remember some other nameless feeling, maybe a 14-year-old boy's understanding of white privilege. I don't know. But I return to that day often. Each time another black man is murdered by the police, a black boy is murdered by the police. I return to that day every time a black American is murdered by a white American because of the color of their skin. I remember when Trayvon Martin was murdered by George Zimmerman. The news kept showing this black and white photo of him wearing a hoodie. I stared at the picture so long one night, it felt like he was speaking to me from the grave. How could you let them do this to me? He asked me. Them. There is a them. The George Zimmermans of the world, the Derek Chauvins, the Gregory and Travis McMichaels. I have seen racial inequality firsthand, and I have been silent. I will no longer be silent. When I think of that day with Lala, I remember the way those cops separated us. I received their message. You are safe, but they are not safe. I doubt I was thinking about Lala, though, that day when the cop pulled up behind me in my parents' driveway and I told my children to go into the house. My 4 biracial children, my 2 biracial sons, and my 2 biracial moons, innocent, guilty of nothing but being brown in Nuevo. I wasn't thinking about Black Lives Matter. I wasn't thinking about racial injustice or police brutality. I was thinking about me. I was thinking, how dare you pull me over when I did nothing wrong? How dare you pull me over because I have biracial children? Stay in the car, the officer told my kids. Why'd you pull me over? I asked. The officer smiled. He stretched his neck in an exaggerated way and glanced at the back of the beat-up car. Taillight, he told me. I didn't have a taillight out. He didn't mention my expired plate. I remember being angry that he didn't notice the expired plate. He'd driven behind me for almost a mile and was trained to notice such things, yet he didn't notice. I was guilty of breaking the law, but I was not being pulled over for breaking the law. I was being pulled over for breaking that age-old, unspoken white law. I was tainting the precious white world so many are fearful of losing. The next part I don't remember. My children don't remember, only that I was angry, disrespectful. I don't remember the words, but I do remember the anger. Remember gripping the door handle. Remember my dad rushing out of the house to scold me, but I don't remember what he said. I don't even remember if I was given a ticket that day or what happened after I calmed down. I asked each of my children, all adults now, what they remembered, and their answers varied. What stands out, though, is something Simeon told me. He remembers me losing my temper, remembers me being disrespectful to the cop. He doesn't remember my words, but this part is important. This is the reason Rajal and I are writing this book. Simeon said these words, and when he said them, my arm hairs stood. His words were truth. His words gave me deeper understanding of what white privilege means. I thought, really thought, because of the love I have for my wife, my children, my family, my friends, I knew what it meant to be Black in America. I have the same worries as a Black parent. I do. My white skin does not protect my brown-skinned children from the police. My sons and daughters will be pulled over because they are Black. My sons and daughters will have to work twice as hard to get half as far because they are Black. As a parent, you love your children, worry for your children, even when they're adults. I know what it's like to be a father of Black children. I don't know. I don't truly know what it's like to be Black in America. If I did, I would not have gripped the door handle that day and opened the door. I would not have lost my temper. For years, I thought I was defending my children in that moment. I understand now I was defending myself, my white privilege, my how dare you, my right to not be harassed when I'm doing nothing wrong, the right my white skin allows me, a right I had forfeited to a certain degree by marrying Black, by fathering Black, by loving Black. My skin does not redeem those I love. That day, my skin did not redeem me. Once again, I was guilty by association. What I didn't realize that day or in the years that followed was the privilege of my whiteness, how a layer of privilege was still present in spite of the wrongness of what happened that day. Simeon gave it to me straight. His words were truth. I learned more from my 19-year-old son in that moment than I had in 30 years of being immersed in Black culture, living with a Black family, being married to a Black woman, and fathering Black children. Simeon's words were truth. Dad, he said, I don't remember what you said to that cop. He paused. But if you were Black, you would have been shot.
That's heavy. I think I'm seeing some unanswered questions. I think we're at the point where we can move to the questions. I don't know, Sam, are you around for that?
Yeah.
Okay.
We do have one from Camille. Thank you both, by the way, for reading those excerpts. They're both so powerful. A lot to reflect on and think about. So this first question is from Camille, and she asks, can you talk about what it was like emotionally to relive these experiences as you wrote them out for the book?
Yes, I can, Camille. Really, some of it, one thing that I found really interesting and challenging is to really begin to realize how much I had pushed away. And as I began to try to recount these stories and as different memories came back to me, it was like, man, I had stuffed that, I had repressed that, I had suppressed that in order to survive. And so it was a challenge to relive some of those painful experiences. But then on the flip side of that, it was a joy to relive some of the details that I was like, oh yeah, I remember that spot in the school. I remember where they played hopscotch, or just little details that came up in the writing that made me smile. And I think that balance of going through the pain of it and the joy of it paints a picture and depicts what life is. Like, you go through these highs and these lows all at the same time. You develop all of these wounds from the bad parts, but they end up working out for your good. You end up having some skills, some abilities. It leads to a career path. It leads to better relationships. And so, we talked about some really tough stuff. We talked about the deaths of some people that we love very much, who mean a lot to us. Of course, that's painful. And the vulnerability that comes with exposing not just what you have experienced, but what you were thinking while you experienced it. That's the part of the vulnerability that kind of caught me off guard. Like, oh man, if I tell this story, I've got to tell what I really thought. Um, it's one thing to say, hey, this happened to me, but now I have to expose a part of me that I tend to keep covered up, that I tend to keep hidden, in order to make sure that I can bring you as a reader into feeling what I feel. I have to expose parts that, for my own protection, I tuck away. And so that vulnerability was an unexpected part of it. The subject matter, when we deal with race and difference and racism, of course, that's going to be challenging. But what I learned about myself in the process was rewarding, was painful, was challenging. It was all of those things at the same time. So it was quite an emotional roller coaster. There were days where I would call Daniel and I had tears in my eyes. There were days when I would put my head in my wife's shoulder and cry. You know, we were dealing with some heavy stuff with Ahmaud Arbery, with George Floyd. We were dealing with some heavy stuff. And so, yeah, that's part of what happened with me. Daniel?
Yeah, and just to piggyback on Rajal, Rajal just turned 44, and I'm about to be 44. So
You gave me you helped me out right there because I actually just turned 45. Just to be honest, I should have just taken it.
oh, that's right. That's you're older than me. Well, you look so young.
Thank you.
But like he said, we were revisiting a lot of trauma in this book, but we survived everything that we have been through up to this point. And you know, we all have our defense mechanisms. We all have our way of surviving the things that we go through, but to revisit it in such an intimate space and to think about it deeply and to analyze it, I found that I was still incredibly angry about things that happened to me when I was 14 years old. And revisiting it was therapeutic in some ways. And then another benefit for me writing the book is, for those of you that haven't read it yet, I moved in with a Black family when I was 17, and a woman took me in and became a third parent to me and a very important person in my life. Her son is, I call him my brother. We're family, but he's been my best friend for years. And a few months before writing this book, we lost her. And because my best friend needed me, I didn't properly mourn her during the process leading up to the funeral, and even during the funeral, because he didn't need me to mourn with him. He needed me to be strong so he could keep it together. That was my responsibility. So shortly after she passed, COVID got ridiculous. Ahmaud Arbery happened, George Floyd happened, Breonna Taylor happened. We were distracted. And when I set out to write the book, you know, she is such an important person in my life that I couldn't write my narrative without having her in it. So I fell apart writing the book. Like I'd be in my office in my room at the time working on those chapters, and I'd have to go lock myself in the bathroom so I wouldn't scare my kids, you know, because as a father and as a leader, you know, both me and Rajal, we talk about this a lot, but we tend to present ourselves a lot stronger than we're actually feeling in those moments. And though I was a mess writing the book and revisiting the trauma and going through the mourning process, it did give me the opportunity to mourn and to remember and to reflect and to honor her life in what she meant to me, and ultimately working through the pain and the tears and the anger was a benefit to me. And now seeing people influenced and impacted by the book makes, and Rajal, it makes everything worth it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all those experiences, all that pain we grew up with from childhood through adulthood, if it can help somebody to develop a better lens and treat somebody else better so that they don't have to have the repeat of these same wounds, worth it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. This one is from Delonda. Since you've written your book, have you had contact with anyone from your past who now sees your past interactions with them from a new perspective? How have people responded to the insight and paradigm shifting nature of your book? If you want me to split those up in two, I'm happy to reread.
About the first part first. You want it first, Daniel, or me? I know we both have answers.
Yeah, I immediately go to White Cloud. And the cool thing about this book is this very small town that is mostly white and had a small population of Black people. many of the white people in that town have Black friends, and they coexist in relative harmony with their Black friends, but they had no idea some of the stuff that was going on. So a lot of people have read this book and were like, wow, I had no idea you were going through this. And what's really, really cool and surprising for me is how many of those people were like, I'm having my children read this book. Like, after reading this, it's affected me. I'm having my children read it. And a lot of the things that we're dealing with, you know, racism has been around forever, and it continues to be around because it's not addressed at the family level. And when it starts getting addressed at the family level and it starts getting killed off through the next generation, you know, that's when we're doing some great work. And that's been surprising and rewarding. One of many surprises, but I'm sure Raj has more to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, just saying the same thing. Like, so many people have reached out, really almost with a posture of apology, which, you know, that's not what we were after with what we wrote, but have reached out like, I can't believe, and this is mostly like white classmates and stuff that I'm talking about. I can't believe that all of this was happening right under my nose and I had no idea that it was going on. And, you know, it's been a great platform to have some deeper dives and discussions, not in an insulting way, but to help people understand, well, that's that's kind of what privilege is. And I know that's a trigger word for people right now, so I don't always address it in that particular way, in those interpersonal conversations. But really, what privilege allows is for you to live your life without having to think about race, without having to think about what someone who's different than you, what their experience is like. And so to see people's eyes opening and they're asking questions and they're wanting to know more, and they're wanting to do better. And like Daniel said, wanting to make sure that the next generation doesn't repeat the cycle of having racial injustice or discrimination or bigotry or whatever it is, prevailing around them, unchecked. And so, you know, it is really exciting and really rewarding, that people are putting the effort in to make sure that their children know what they didn't know, that they don't miss what they did miss. And so that's been incredible. I've heard from a lot of key characters in the book. Um, heard from ex-girlfriends. I've heard from a lot of people. So it's been an interesting journey. But you know, then I've heard, you know, one of my best friends growing up, I mentioned in the book a lot, Brent Fundo. He's a principal at White Cloud High School, where Daniel and I both graduated from. And I heard from him, and that was so encouraging when he was like, "Man, I knew everybody you were talking about. I remembered every story. I remembered when you liked little Jessica, when you wrote her that letter." Um, but then also saying, "But I had no idea, of some of the challenges that you were experiencing based on race." And now he is postured and positioned in his principal role to make sure, that the generation of students, the generation of people of difference that are going through there now have a better support system in leadership, than what we had at that particular time. So that's amazing to me.
Thank you. Thank you. We have one from Deborah. How can the lessons in wounds, particularly those about cross-cultural communication, be used to help young people avoid the communication issues of previous generations? It's a perfect follow-up question.
You want it? You want me to take it?
You can take that one.
All right. So yeah, one thing that I have discovered, most of my career has been in higher ed. And so, like I said earlier, most of it has been at PWIs, predominantly white institutions. Um, I have the ability to go into different people groups, different racial groups, different belief groups, and at least seemingly seamlessly navigate those environments. Daniel, I've seen him do it. He can go into an all black environment, all white environment, probably all whatever environment, and he can function. He doesn't fall apart. Whereas some people do. And so what I've noticed, especially in the educational process with majority students, with white students, um, most don't have that ability. Most have never had to go into a room where they're the only white person, for instance, because the way that the demographic of where they live is set up or where they go to school is set up is they can surround themselves with comfort. Um, Most people of color, at least in white environments, we have to learn how to navigate difference and adjust communication, as your question referred to, for survival, so that we can be seen as worthwhile, as intelligent, as capable. We have to go into the interview and be able to code switch, which is to change your language based on the cultural landscape that you're in. We have to be able to do that, whereas most people just be who they are in those environments. And so, uh, I guess one of the challenges that I've put when I've worked at PWIs is how can we help, especially these white students, to have experiences of immersion where they can develop these skills of navigation, because the way that the world is set up and the way that the trends are going, you're not going to be able to stay in your bubble for much longer. You know, the World Wide Web is connecting us right now. We are in multiple states. I saw New York, I'm in Tennessee, Daniel's in Michigan, Sam's in California. People are everywhere, and different backgrounds, and we can go international with that too. If we do not know how to engage people who look different than us, who are from different faith backgrounds, who are from different sexualities, if we don't know how to navigate, how to humanly deal and humanely deal with difference, um, not only will we not have a nice broad experience and get along well with people, but we won't be able to get jobs done. We won't be able to make visions come to pass. We won't be able to we won't be able to come up with vaccines for COVID-19 if we don't know how to work with people who are different than us. We won't be able to transport those. For us to do anything, we're going to deal with people who are different than us. So we need that language.
Yes, so important. Sorry, I was muted and didn't realize. Sorry for the delay. This one is from Deborah. Do you believe it's possible to get beyond the deep, lifelong wounds of racism? It's a big one.
Yeah, it's a huge one.
I think a wound, in essence, it is a scar. It is something that is never going to go away. But what Rajal and I have learned through this process is the power of telling your story. If we talk about racism on a philosophical level or a race theory level, people are going to argue it. No, that doesn't happen. This doesn't exist. But like Rajal likes to say a lot during these, if Rajal says his arm hurts, how are you going to tell him his arm does not hurt? If you tell your story and you share your story, someone can't dispute your experience. And that you had that experience is something that other people can learn from and people can be moved from. Because, I mean, maybe I'm a romantic, but I like to believe that most people, regardless of their skin color, believe racism is wrong. I believe that. I don't think that's what the problem is. The problem is people think racism doesn't exist anymore. And the only way to change those people's minds, because you're not going to change someone's mind who's decided he was racist, but you can get allies who are not overtly racist, that are kind of in denial about the problem. If you're a white person, you have white parents, white family members, you live in a white neighborhood, you are not seeing the things that Rajal sees on a day-to-day basis. You're not seeing the things that I see, being married to a Black woman or having Black children, having Black friends and family members. So sharing your stories, and in my case, being a witness as a white American, is hopefully making an impact and touching people on a human level. And we've seen a lot of people, like we referenced earlier, saying, wow, I didn't know that was going on. What can I do about it? And as long as the conversation is beginning, then we're doing work, we're making progress. Because the minute a white American that wasn't aware of a lot of this stuff wants to take action and is asking what they can do to take action and are willing to take action, then we're making an impact. So I guess to circle back on the question, no, I don't think you can, quote unquote, get over what you've been through. I think you live with your scars. You carry them like a burden. And my advice to anyone in that position, and I can speak from writing this book and sharing my stories, is to share your stories and let all the bad that's happened to you be a witness and an opportunity for a conversation to begin toward change.
Yeah. And if I could just add, right, piggybacking on what Daniel said, use your wounds. You may not lose your wounds, but you can use your wounds. You can use your experiences to inform your behavior, to inform your intentionality. So on a macro level, will we get past racism? I don't mean to be pessimistic, but probably not in my lifetime. On a macro level, like as a country, as a nation, probably not. It's rooted very deeply. On a micro level, if I ask myself, and if you ask yourself, will I get past the scars and the wounds? It depends on how you define getting past. I'm not going to ever forget it. I'm going to let it, though, inform me to make positive impact. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to talk to people. I'm going to try to change broken systems. I'm going to use my human resources influence to make hiring decisions and change systemic structure. Like those wounds, I don't want to lose them. Those wounds produce ability. They produce lens. But will I get past it emotionally? Yes, I will on a micro level, because I can't afford to let that paralyze me and stop me from making progress. So macro, it's going to be here. But micro, I'm not going to let it overcome me. I'm going to use it to influence and to be the petrol and the gasoline that drives the act.
Thank you. Thank you. We are about at time. We could probably take one more question if you guys want, but if no one else has any other questions, that is all. I wish we could eradicate racism in our lifetime, but I don't see it in this lifetime either. I would so hope there's like magical earthly utopia in our future, though. I think that would do so much. But thank you both so much for being with us tonight. It was really amazing to hear your stories, and I hope so many people read this book. And this will remain recorded here, so if anyone wants to share this with anybody that didn't see it tonight, you can watch it here again. All you have to do is register, and then it will also be on our YouTube page as well.
Thank you so much for having us, Sam.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Everyone take care, stay safe, have a wonderful night, and thank you both again for joining us.
Thank you.
Good night.